Hello, hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Welcome to a talk, what to know about creating your new website or app. So what we're going to walk through is more of a top level discussion or really just review of recommendations and just end with some Q&A at the end. I know some of you probably done these code talks before, so hopefully this is helpful and happy to answer any questions at the end. So this is going to be reviewing things about recommendations. So really, this is not really geared towards specific design. It's more of potential clients that might come in and be interested in working to create a digital product, website, or an app. So the kind of approach I had in this is more we often get, and I'll go in a little bit about myself in a minute, but we often get contacted by clients interested in a new website or an app, and so there's usually an upfront discussion and some back and forth that happens initially with that. And so I kind of approach this as what could help with some upfront knowledge that are common questions or common things that are immediately asked so that that could hopefully better prepare someone when they come approach a agency or a studio or a freelance or anybody with help for design and development of a new website or an app. So that's really part of this is my take. Some of it is my kind of influence. I'm not saying these are all right and wrong answers. It's more of just kind of how we operate and how kind of based on my experience. So in that, we'll kind of talk through process, establishing a process. And again, this is based on my studio that I runs process that we use. Kind of helping with identifying a foundational need. Sometimes there's maybe you know what you need. Sometimes maybe you don't. So kind of just lightly discussing that. And then identifying potential partner fits because sometimes you might not know, what type of person that you need to contact based on what you need. What's involved in your estimate. I know a lot of times people just they want to say, "Hey, I need a new website. Or I need an app. How much would that cost?" Or how long would it take, and how much roughly would it cost? So that's always a difficult question to answer. So usually you need to have some upfront discussion. So hopefully there's a few tips that will be provided in here to help with that upfront request so that when you do contact somebody and ask for an estimate, what are some things you could provide to help them with a response? And then, some tips on just selecting somebody to who's a good fit after all this, with some tips on who you could select or some things to look out for to help you with the successful design and development of a website or an app. So a little about me, my background. I am wear a few hats. I've been doing this for several years. Late '90s, early 2000s, pretty much when I started. I went to really pretty much into high school. I went to a small private school in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was fortunate enough that there was a an upstart computer program that they had, and in that I was introduced to a program called HyperCard and HyperStudio, and so what these were precursors to what eventually became Flash, Macromedia Flash at the time. And Adobe ended up buying Macromedia, and Flash was had its heyday for a while, and then it's now not used anymore. But that was kind of I didn't even know it at the time, but I enjoyed it. It kind of creating interactive. Basically, it was interactive cards, and you could add buttons and things and click between them. It wasn't anything on the internet. It was more of an interactive presentation. But think of like early Keynote or something like that. But uh, but I did a presentation and a project in this class on sharks, and it was really fun, and I just enjoyed it. But never did I think it would be a job. But when I look back, that was kind of the beginning of when I think I just discovered a joy for just digital and interactive uh, design and just creating something on it. So then I kind of evolved and went to college at University of Georgia, and still was always an artist, always enjoyed design, but never really thought I would go down that path. But I ended up teaching myself a lot of web design. My roommate in college was an art major, and I enjoyed. He took some web classes, and just getting influence from seeing what he was doing and classes I was taking. I was interested in pursuing a little more, but they wanted me to be a little bit more focused in my major. And at the time, what I wanted to do was this blend of design um, and digital, like programming. But I wasn't really a programmer, and I wasn't an art major, so I kind of made my own path. And so I was taking psychology classes, and I really enjoyed that. So I decided just to major in psychology and take a lot of computer science classes while doing that. And so so it's kind of where I got out of that and just decided to forge my own path and went through the agency realm to learn a little more about the ad agency world. I enjoyed that as well. So I was a creative and a designer, and kind of the early days of digital when it was in its infancy, when websites were a value added thing. So it was just early. No one really knew what it was, and it was kind of the beginning. And then over time, I'm fortunate to spend time in my formative years in agencies to help learn how to design, how to present, how to handle clients, handle feedback, all those types of things that really helped my just foundational skill set. So I left the agency world and started a company called Understory, and so now we're focused on brand and digital design. So over the years, I've done lots of different hats. So that's why I list here that I do still do UX and UI design, um, do brand and graphic design, creative director, meaning I don't necessarily do design. I just help direct some of the work that we do. Studio director, and then it's a business. I help with hiring and training and all of our operations, things like that. And then client psychologist, I threw in here semi as a wink. A lot of that is important because we have to work with clients and help manage them and help just uh, create good work, and that takes time and that takes effort, and is an important part as well. And I never really thought how much I would use my somewhat of my degree, but a lot of it's just really the thinking side of both clients and just who you design for, keeping that in mind all the time. I mentioned Understory. So Understory is a brand and digital studio. So we do branding and identity design as well as websites and apps, things like that. Any kind of digital related work. One of our sayings, we believe, invest in great design. Meaning, that's partly why we have the acorn as part of our logo. It's a lot of people see design as an expense. So what we try to do is just shift that mindset to say, if you do it right, it's really an investment. If you approach it in the proper way and approach it, asking the right questions and asking why often, to just make sure that you uncover the proper solution, then it can be a valuable thing. We kind of sit in this in between brand UX, business marketing, and technology. So, we are a mix of all of that. So, a lot of our clients, we sit in, one of these buckets more than the other, but we find that sweet spot is where we help and do the best, we do the best work. So I mentioned at the beginning process. So process, we're very focused on process. A lot of people have their own versions of process. This is one that we use at Understory, and we're not going through this whole thing for this talk. I just wanted to show this just to show that when you do create anything for a digital product, you need to be mindful of some level of all three of these. There's what we're going to focus on. This is mostly on that plan, that first column over here on the side. Hopefully that works. There we go. Over here on the left hand side. So over here on the left, you see top level, like plan, produce, and propel are our three main buckets of the process. And that planning process is really what we're going to talk through today, is something just to help with maybe some upfront knowledge for you. But a lot of times we find that including that maybe in a scope can help this plan. Sometimes you don't know the questions that you need. Sometimes you just know you might need something, or you don't know your content, or you need help uncovering that. So we do offer that in anyone you talk to. So again, this is based on Understory, but this could be anyone that you go talk with. But a planned process could be part of a scope that is paid for, or you might have enough to be able to say, "Hey, here's what we've got," in order for someone to do an estimate. So sometimes we'll do a small scope that's more just for planning to help identify some of this. And then out of that comes an estimate or comes a little bit more of a scope written that then some clients can choose to say, we'd like to work with you and take that, or it's enough of a scope that they could then take and share and say, hey, here's a little bit more of a definition of what we need to get an estimate on. So just to touch on that, I wanted to show that our process does involve a plan, immerse and identify, meaning looking a little bit more at your goals, identifying what it is that you might need as far as a strategy goes, as far as structure, anything that you need to make it a success before moving into that production side, which is when we actually do designs, do a little more, visuals that need to be required for it, the actual programming or video shoots or photography shoots or anything that you need, illustrations, anything that's needed to make that a success. And then the propel side is more of the once you're finished or once you're in that development phase is done, you're entering your content, you've got analytics in place, and analyzing how things are doing and then improving upon that. And that sometimes goes back. That's kind of why we have the arrows. It kind of does this cycle. It goes back to ideating and implementing, and sometimes it even goes back to immersion and identify, depending on the need. But just wanted to touch on this that you need a good process. So whoever you do work with, make sure that they do share that and they have something so that you kind of know where you fall in this, so there's some clarity and something that guides you along the way, because this is a process. So when you start, you got to have something that's a blueprint that can help guide you along the way, because it's an important need. So again, we're going to focus more on that first plan side. That's kind of what this is just this top level of like, hey, I need what to know. I need a website, I need an app, something along those lines. What can you use to help identify your needs, for that? So the reason why planning is so important is that, and I love this quote. I know it's a Steve Jobs quote. It's kind of a cliche to have one in here, but he's got so many of them. But it is true. So design isn't just what it looks like, and it feels like. Design is how it works. A lot of you probably heard that before, but it is one that's important. So a lot of times, clients, or you might want to know, how much does it cost? Well, identifying a little bit about how it's going to work is important. The design is important as well, because a lot of the times with the programming on the front end, meaning that's the visual side as far as how does it work and how does it interact, things like that. How does it display? That's a big waiver that can really change based on how things are designed. So that's something that you kind of have to figure out when you're working with someone to get an estimate. They just kind of will have to know roughly what they think a design would be. So that scope side is still important to identify a little bit more about how it would work. So if there's any kind of special functionality, or any kind of special impact, or anything that's needed in that to help identify that up front in that planning process and share that, then that can help whoever you talk to with responding with an accurate estimate. So one of the top things about it too is, what do you really need? And again, you might know what you need and you might not, but the first question is, do you need a website or an app? And that's usually a question that can be answered based on your content or based on what it is that you're trying to do. That's also, there's a lot of factors that are part of that. Websites are public. Obviously there's no app store or anything to download. If you do go the app, more of the app store, like a native app, then it's just a different tech stack, different approach where you got to push people to download it, versus sometimes, and I kind of put this in a bucket of both mobile and web app slash website. This is just kind of a talk in general, probably leaning a little bit more website, but we do web apps as well. We have done mobile apps as well. So they all kind of share a similar, but I would say this leans a little bit more websites or more web apps than mobile apps, but they all kind of share a similar need. So types of websites, and again, this is not encompassing. I'll probably miss things in here, but certain types of sites is a redesign. Sometimes you might have an existing website and you just want to redo it. So a lot of times the question we'd have is like, well, what content changes? Design is not just a coat of paint and picking a font and picking a color. It can be, but that's not our philosophy or how we would suggest approaching it. You really want to look at it as a foundational, your brand, your tone, the way your copy is, the way your colors are, of course, the way it's presented in a way is all part of that design. So, sometimes people think I have a website, I don't like it, I want to redesign. It's like, well, sometimes the reason why you might not like your site is the content. So that needs to be looked at. And then you can have someone help with a better way of articulating that content. So that's one thing to be cognizant of with redesigns. But then there's other types of sites, brochure style sites. That's your basic, about services, contact, nothing crazy. E-commerce, if you're trying to sell something, it's worth noting up front so that that can help you with identifying the solution that would be in place. Do you need a full e-commerce site like a Shopify? Do you need, if you're in WordPress, WooCommerce, and there's all different solutions that you could do. Magento, all there. I mean, it's endless, So it's kind of worrying about a little bit more about your needs, and then finding a partner who can help you with a best suggestion based on what it is that you're trying to do. But again, having some identification up front of this to help with with the type of website can help. So these are just some notes on here: blog news, resource sharing, product or software as a service, SaaS type. SEO is a big push for anything that you do go down the website path, and some of these can be a mix. It's not just one of these. I'm just saying these are the types of things that you might need that would be part of a site. With apps, websites are that informational content based. Apps are a little bit more functional. So, if you're trying to make something that does something, then it's a utility. If it's a functional base, then an app is probably a better fit. Now, those apps could still be web based, meaning you don't have to go through a store. It could just be a URL, but it's designed to function like an app. We've done things like that. You could just be a really well done mobile website too. That could solve whatever that you're trying to do. You could do a native app. A lot of times, unless you're needing like push notifications or accelerometer or a lot of things that are unique to the phone itself, to the operating system of within the phone. Unless you're needing those, then a lot of times you can go web or even go hybrid, which is you don't have to go necessarily full code for the app store. You could do a mix where you could control your content through like a web-based CMS, but yet it powers an app. So there's different approaches in that. Again, I don't think you're going to necessarily come to the table with saying this is. I mean, you might know exactly what you need. This is just more of a touch to say, have an idea so that you can say, here's what we're trying to do, so that you kind of know, because a lot of times you'll find places that specialize in one or both of these. Usually you're going to find places that are really good at apps, or places that are really good at websites, or places that can do both. But it's good to kind of have an idea so you can identify the right partner to contact. We do a lot of this where there's both. We've done websites that have a web app factor. We've done it where there's a website and then there's completely separate apps, but yet you need to be mindful that your design and things feel similar between them. So it's good to have at least some knowledge of what it is that you're wanting to come to the table with for your solution. So I mentioned that identifying a vendor, and I have that crossed out on here on purpose because I hate that word. I try my best to not use that. It really is a partner. I mean, vendors again goes back to that, an expense versus an investment. To me, vendor just seems like you're just paying somebody to do something and you're done, and that's not what we try to do. Sometimes that might be a fit for somebody. We try to see ourselves as a partner, and so I recommend that mindset be on the client side as well. Is that you should try to find someone that's going to serve in that fashion. So finding the right type of solution for what you're needing is an important part of this too. I know that's probably one of the more common things when we're contacted. So our style work, we typically do custom work. And I say can, I'm a sucker for alliteration too. I was trying to find the right word for that. So hopefully that doesn't sound bad, but and so it's really the difference between the two of these is that, custom work is when you do a unique design and a coded specifically for that project. So if you imagine, it's just a custom build, design and build. That can be in a static, like no CMS. That can be CMS is content management system, just to clarify that. So WordPress, Drupal, Craft, those are common content management systems. Shopify, Webflow. So these are all platforms that you would be based in. So again, you might know, hey, I want a WordPress site. I want it to be in Webflow. I want it to be whatever it is. There's other custom and other CMSs that we work with as well. And so we tend to just not worry too much about that until we talk to a client and we can suggest based on the needs. So again, you might know a couple of these. You might say, well, we like to stay in WordPress, and that's fine, but that's something you want to share up front so that when you talk to potential partners, make sure that they have experience in WordPress or experience in one of these. Ideally find someone who has experience in them so that they know how to create it for you, because some of these do have some nuances and are needed to have some experience in them. So canned, I mean a free or purchase pre-designed theme or experience. A lot of these, WordPress has those. So I have, you'll notice WordPress and Shopify are in both, and that's because you can do custom WordPress sites that's like what we do, or a lot of places will buy a theme. There's tons of themes out there that you can use. The biggest difference with those is that they're just more they're a fit if you're needing to just kind of update your site based on just your brand. So if you have a color and a logo and a few photos and some copy and some basic stuff, that's a fit for you. So that's kind of the difference between those. So your Squarespaces, your Wix, Shopify has them as well. And so we've got experience in doing both of these, but in my experience and ours doing it, we try to avoid doing the can just because it's just a different world. It's more of taking a crowbar, trying to like get something to work the way that you want versus just doing a custom job is the reason why we tend to do that. So to touch on some points between the two, custom does tend to cost more just because it is a full job. There are skill sets in that, as I mentioned, a CMS or just a certain technology that you might need. It's important to identify some of that. It is more adaptable because it is custom. But that means depending on your need in this, if you're looking at growing or if it's for a business or a company that's been around, like it's better because you can adapt to it and grow from it. Obviously, branding wise, it's a custom design. If you do go with a another theme that's canned, there's tons of other sites that have that same thing. Just because you change your color or change your image, you can give it a little bit of personality, but it's still using a canned theme. So again, that could be a fit though. So it just depends. It's less expensive. So if you don't have much of a budget, it's faster. I didn't add that in here as well because it is already pre-coded. There are more people who could support it because it uses page builders, it uses plugins, it uses things that people could come in and do updates to if it's a WordPress site. If it's a Wix or Squarespace, they're already like a product already made. So there is a fit, for that in some cases. So you don't always need a custom build. There's just different things that vary in that. So you want to make sure that when you're trying to identify someone, do they fit in one of these? Sometimes places will do both. Sometimes they only do one. They don't do custom work. They only do themes, or they only do custom work and they don't do themes. It just depends. So it's something to be mindful of. I know this is something that a lot of clients who initially contact us don't quite understand. So sometimes when they get an estimate and they talk to one place who specializes in custom work, and another place who specializes in more themed can work, that price is going to vary, and it's can be very confusing. And that's I try to identify that before we go down that path, but it does happen sometimes. So just something to be mindful of. One other thing with your site is to be mindful of it as a system. It's not standalone. So during your planning, think about how it fits into your rest of your I say brand ecosystem. I say digital ecosystem. I use that a lot. Digital ecosystem, meaning like all your connections. Do you run social media accounts? Do you have your other content? Do you do other marketing? Make sure that you're thinking how you're using all that together. And the website should. I see the website as kind of your central part. Your a lot of a hub and spoke type model. Be mindful of that, so that when you're thinking about your site, how does all that come together, and share that, so that who you're talking to is mindful and understanding of how that fits in, because that can impact things and how they might suggest that they all can work better together. So what do I mean by systems also is, on your content side. So if you have a blog, so how's that going to be supported so that if you ask for one, I always tease and say it's adopting a puppy. If you want a blog, it's great, but you got to take care of it. It's going to be something you have to consistently post. It doesn't matter if it's, on some schedule, it's got to be on some type of schedule. It doesn't have to be constant, but just be mindful. How will you support that? How do you keep your content fresh? It's something that's important just to show that your site is active and it can help with your search. It's just better to have some plan in mind. And then other marketing efforts, do you create video? Do you do TV spots? Do you have any of that that you can put on your website? Your social media content, are you icons are fine, that link out to your social media accounts, but sometimes you can, bring in feeds. You can find other ways of leveraging your social content through your website or your apps. It's something to be mindful of for that. And then landing page strategies, depending on your type of business, sometimes having landing pages are important so that you have something in place that's planned for specific pushes. Is it marketing pushes? Is it discounts if you're doing e-commerce? Is it pushing a certain product or a special service? Just things to think of up front. And sometimes you won't have that up front. So that's why it's important to think of when you create your site as a system so that when that need does arise, you're not having to reinvent the wheel. You have something in place to where you can create something to support things like this. And then from a design perspective, I would hope you have a brand guide. If not, then I would definitely try to establish one before reaching out to partners for design and development, because that just is something they're going to want, because that just kind of shows both what they're going to work with, but also it kind of gives a glimpse into how structured you are and kind of how prepared. I always use that as, like, if someone's got a really buttoned up, nice brand guide, that tells me you're organized and you're ready to go. And so that's an important thing. So if you don't have that, maybe who you talk to can help you with that. So it's something to bring up, but something to be mindful of. And then in the creation of this, you should hopefully be able to establish a design system. If you don't have that already, doing a website or a digital product means that you take your brand guide, you make sure you have your colors, your fonts, your logo, all that implemented in a way so that it's now addressed, so that in the future, if you need to do any other new digital work, or if you decide you want to do an email campaign, if you do end up needing to do a mobile app or other apps in the future, you've got that. Even if you end up working with one company to do one thing and you decide to do work with a different company later, if you have that done, then it's something that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It can be very valuable, and that you kind of, even into your marketing materials, you've got a look, not just abstract like you see in a guide, but actually implemented in a way so that makes it a little easier with creating things in the future. So it's something to be mindful of, that hopefully you have a brand guide. And if you already have a design system from maybe a redesign, then that can help with sharing that so that your new partner can see it and say, follow a little bit more about what would be involved in an estimate. So to touch a little bit on helping with estimates, when you're to this point now, you kind of have an idea of what it is that you want, a website or an app, some idea about the functionality and your content. The more that you can share that up front, like what is your website outline structure? It could just be like a paper outline, like just bullets. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just something to help. And if you don't know, make sure to include that you want help in identifying that. I touched on in the process earlier on planning that we often include that as part of a scope. So whoever you're talking to might be able to help you identify what that is. But even if you have a starting point, a lot of times we'll have clients that provide that to us, and that then out of our work we'll massage that, or we'll change it and evolve it based on, once we see the content, then that can affect that. So I touched on brand guidelines. Make sure you share if you have brand guidelines. If you don't have brand guidelines, just share your logo. That's fine, and just say, oh, this is all we have. Because again, that impacts the estimate they come back to, because that means that they're going to have to identify a little bit more of a look for this, as opposed to if you already have colors and fonts and things to consider, that can be a factor. Share any special functionality. So there are requirements, like you need a map, interactive map that shows locations, or third-party integration things like a CRM, or anything that you need to have something integrated. Make sure you have that shared, so that that's something that's considered upfront as well. And if you have any content up front, it's always best to have content. I mean, the content should be what drives things. But I, I've done this long enough that it happens, but it's rare that we get all of the content up front. Definitely something that we push for. There's kind of something just based on my experience that I know a sweet spot when I feel like we've seen enough content or enough to be able to move forward, but I wish that was a consistent thing and it's just not. So I always try to push to get at least some idea of the actual content. But if you can get the content up front before you start reaching out to get estimates, so that you can share that just as a doc, it could be a Google Doc, it could be just something, Word file. It doesn't have to be anything, just something enough to show what you're needing to communicate. That can go a long way to helping with an accurate estimate as well. But at the very minimum, a content structure, even if you don't have your exact headlines and your exact copy, just some idea of what you're needing as far as visuals go and copy goes to allow someone to come back to you with what they would recommend. For custom sites, the reason why this is important is that design's typically done based on analyzing that content and identifying what are consistencies to say, okay, here's back to the system mindset. Here's what we need to design for you so that you've got this in a way that can be built. So your content can then be entered, but at the same time, we don't know what you might need, 6 months down the line. So doing something so that you've got something that can adapt for you, and there could be something where you'll need a new scope or something new for that, but at least you've got something that works well and it's a living, breathing thing that's based on your brand that can work. And we do that based on looking at your content so that we can, make sure you have that. So whoever you talk to is going to look at that and that's going to affect that side of it. If you're not going the custom side and you're going more like a theme, same thing, because when someone's looking at a theme and they're looking at what's involved to help with creating your site, they need to find something that's going to support the structure, the look that you need, the just general structure, so that when they enter that and they update it, that it's going to work. So it's important to at least see some idea of that. Your content and your level of complication affects the cost as well. So I know that's another common misconception is that people come and say, "Oh, I only need a one-page site," or "It's only 3 pages, so it shouldn't cost that much." And sometimes that is the case, but we've done a single-page site that's more complicated than a 5-page site. It's not about number of pages; it's more about the level of interactivity, level of different deferring types of content, things like that impact the cost. So don't worry so much about trying to come in and tell someone how many pages you need. Again, you can show us some type of idea of the thoughts of your structure. That's good to know, but I wouldn't get hung up on thinking that it's, the number of pages is too much of a factor. It is a factor, but it's not like the factor. And then be clear if you need assistance with entering content. Another asterisk that is important to note because this does affect the time required. A lot of times, what will happen is back to your content side. It's good to see the content in order to show a design. So how we operate is that we will show you a visual design that uses as much real content as you've got, so that you can see the design in it. But it's not going to be necessarily every page of your site. Like back to that idea that we establish your common needs and common page templates or common content blocks. That's what we focus on. So once we get into the development side, there's a content entry phase that's back into that where we talked about plan and produce and propel. More in that in between that production and propel phases where you're entering in all your content. Um, a lot of times, depending on your scope, we will sometimes do help with that content entry. But if you're budget conscious, sometimes not doing that, you handling the content entry or someone on your team can help keep your costs down. I will say it's good to find a partner that can do that, help you with it, because that's kind of that process that can get bumpy. So making sure that you pick someone as a partner to help you with that is a key thing with your content side. So just a flag for you when you are looking at getting estimates, make sure that you clarify that content side and that content entry, because that's something that can a lot of times get passed over with a big brush. And I find that's where conflict or some difficulty and bumpiness in the project can happen. So make sure you have some clarity with that with who you work with. So back to, you've kind of established now kind of what you need. You've got your some information together. You've identified potential partners or who you want to work with, and you've shared that information with them. So now, how does it help with potential selection of a partner? Um, Products are a team effort, and that includes you. So another thing to be mindful of is that you need to participate in this. Your participation will vary. There is a lot of upfront working together. and that plan process and in that design process. And it does kind of go into an area after that approval where the development happens, where there is some time that goes by. It's a good time to work on your content if you don't have all that ready. So it's something that you could share with who you select just to get feedback to say, is this working or looking good? But it is something to be mindful of, that you need to be active and you need to find a partner who wants you to be active and be part of that process. So look for that as well, and make sure that you have a good connection with them, because you're going to need to work with them, not just in the creating it, but in the second bullet here, but in the launch. It's very easy to see the launch as the end, because there's a lot of effort that goes into any product. So launching anything should be celebrated, but a lot of times that's the beginning. And so sometimes there's a little bit of, okay, you're thankful to have it launched, but that's where you got to start looking at the evolution and testing, making sure that you have someone that can help you with that if that's something that you're wanting help with. Um, so plan to have some support for that. I would recommend, typically we try to do at least 3 to 6 months of some type of support, just to help with how to update your content. If you still have questions there, if it's even your partner helping you with updating your content, just make sure that you want to have some valued relationship in that, and make sure that it's included. And when you talk to them about an estimate, that there is some support that's there to help you along the way. And then kind of ending here on the last slide here. I just liked this slide. I thought it was funny, and it's pretty accurate too. But this is just back to the fact that it's a project. Anytime you're getting together and you're creating something as a team that has a long arc to it, and doing websites or products typically do. Uh, this is something that kind of be mindful. This is back to where I think it's important to make sure you have a process in mind and process in play, and a good relationship with who you work with. Because when you first start on a project, there's a lot of excitement, and I've seen this time and again, just from people I know who work with other different agencies or studios, and even within Understory itself. There's always excitement, and it's just natural at the beginning of a project where you talk through your planning, even getting into the design, and you kind of you build what it's going to be, what it could be, what it should be, and get into the production side of it and programming. And that's where you kind of see things get down, where the down and dirty work is kind of happening. And that's typically what happens when you get it programmed and it's ready, and then that content entry side hits. And sometimes, depending on the amount of how big deep a site is, that can feel overwhelming. And so, being mindful to make sure that you have that in place and you have a partner that helps you get through that, it is something that just goes up from there. And by the time you get to a launch and your final product, it it's awesome. It can be great. And so, selecting a good partner that's in this process with you, it can make a big difference to where it stays a success. I have seen and know people who, that beginning part's great, and they just never quite get that final product up to where the expectations are. So finding a partner that can match as close to what is shown or what's talked about before the end product from the beginning product is important. And that messy in between is one of the most important parts, that sometimes your end product is even better than what you thought at the beginning, because you've identified some problems or identified things that improve in the end game. So something to be mindful of in this is why I think it's important to make sure that you're mindful that you're part of this process too, and that finding a good partner and getting into it can be very rewarding, and you end up with a good product, just by having some expectations and some plan in place. And so that's pretty much the end. For having my social handles here for my personal and for Understory. It's kind of a quick talk. As I said, just wanted to give some tips and kind of general information and recommendations on what I would suggest to help with creating a digital product website or an app, of really just identifying what your needs might be, and then helping find someone to help you through that. And that could just be someone to help you just with design, help you with design and development, but something in that to hopefully give you a little bit of a foundation and knowledge to improve when you need that help. So happy to answer any questions or anything. I've tried to keep an eye on. I guess I didn't see any kind of comments on here. Sorry, I'm just now seeing that. Uh, Someone asking, have you used three JS? I have heard of three.js. I have not personally. My programming days are behind me. I used to do Flash development, as I touched on before. Flash was something that was in my background. Like, I did some front end development and did a lot of ActionScript 2, ActionScript 3, pretty much back in those days. And then I just eventually just realized I wasn't enjoying as much and focused a little bit more on the design and the UX side, things like that. So I'm familiar with it, but I have not personally used it. No. Trying to look through other questions here. Oh, Julia, thank you. She's being nice, talking about Understory. So I'm still learning how to do a custom site until I get there. What platform would I recommend? And that's a good question, and it really depends. I know that's a tough answer to have, but it is true. It really depends. I would say if you're needing just like a startup, like a quick something that you're just needing like a basic marketing site, probably Squarespace. I mean, it's probably the easiest to use as far as just picking something, putting in an ad, putting a couple photos, that type of thing. If you're needing to do e-commerce, I would say Shopify. Shopify's got some really good. We've done custom Shopify themes in the past, and we were pretty early on Shopify back. My wife and I started a business years ago that was selling college football dresses. I'm a big college football fan. Of course, we live in the South. You know how it is. I went to Georgia. She went to South Carolina, so we're SEC side. But she loved game day dresses, and so that was the thing. So she had a great idea to start selling dresses, and so we actually used Shopify early on when it was in its infancy, and it was great. It was awesome, and it still is, but it's gotten way more mature now, and so their themes they have are pretty good. So if you're doing e-commerce, I would probably suggest Shopify. And then if you're needing something a little bit more than like a Squarespace, WordPress can work for you. I just urge to be a little cautious. WordPress themes they do such a good job selling. You see these themes, they look so awesome, but I just find they get really convoluted quick. And we have lots of clients who come to us with them that are frustrated because they can't update it, or they do something and it breaks. So not to say there's not good ones out there. There are, but I don't really know. We don't specialize in those, so I can't say a specific one. But I would say the more basic that you can go, the better with a WordPress thing. But hopefully that answers your question. I would say Squarespace for a basic web. You're just talking about that. If you're a designer and you're wanting to do like a portfolio, Adobe's portfolio, they have one that works pretty well. That's tied to their Behance. I think it's called Adobe Portfolio. Like that's a pretty good solution if you don't want to go the Squarespace route. Because at least if you post your work, you're getting it in the Behance network, and then you can leverage that into your personal portfolio. Same thing with Dribbble, even though Dribbble is not quite what it used to be. I still like Dribbble, but I know it's not quite the site that it was, or the community that's not quite the size as it was, but it's still doing well. So it's another outlet you could do too. They've got a way that you could do a portfolio site for that too. So it really just depends on what your needs are. Any other questions or anything in that? And of course, I'm happy if anybody sees this later. I have no problem. Yeah, I have no problem answering questions. If people want to shoot me an email or come to our website, like I'm more than happy to help or give suggestions on any kind of answer.
Hey, Eric, thank you for the presentation. I did have a few questions that I just wanted to ask you
Sure.
while we still have you.
Mhm.
And the first one is, I know you talked a little bit in your presentation about cost. What would you say is a great low starting cost to having like a great one page site up?
Again, it's tough, but it depends. For a custom, we don't, and again, it depends on your studio. We tend to not do a whole lot of work that's less than like 5,000 around in there. But we don't do a whole lot of like a single page site that isn't have like sections to it. So it just depends. Like I said, we've done single page sites that were more complicated than a three or 5 page site, and would cost more because of it. So it just depends. Like if you're just needing to put some copy in an image and a contact button, that's where it's probably worth just doing like a Squarespace. But if you're needing to have, something that's more of a custom, something specific to your brand, or something that's specific functionality or more impact, it just that's where finding someone that can help you articulate that is the better thing. We do work sometimes, like we've done. One of our clients is Capital City Honey was a great. That's something where some people come to us and they're good people and they've got a great idea, and we don't we can sometimes work for things that aren't quite a full cost that we would do, just if we know that it's a startup or something smaller, but yet we identify it as a creative opportunity, and we identify that it's a good client that are passionate and can work with us on it. So it's tough to say. We don't always, that's something that we know that's more of a labor of love at that point. But as long as the ultimate is that we end up with a great product that then other clients see, and they come and say we love that work, and we ended up winning awards for it, things like that. That's where you want to do that. But that's pretty rare. We do have people come in that if we're not a fit for them, I point you in the direction. I'll try to help people find something that will help them do that. So that would be that's kind of a rough thing to answer on it. So it just depends on how complicated a single page site would be. Hopefully that helps. See another. Oh, did you have another question before? I saw someone else ask one.
We have a. I could show this question first, and then I'll ask my second question.
Yes. So any good books for UI UX designer? It's funny. I tend to get books. I get a lot tend to be more on the design side, like more like I just got this book, Principles of like logo design that I just got. I tend to get for some reason more into books like this. Most of my UI UX I've done through a lot of it just from experience or through. I'm trying to think of some books that I've seen. I really don't educate too much on that through books, more through sites, more through articles. Just I try to always carve out time just to get lost online. I think that's an important thing. And I don't even know what that's going to be. And what I mean by that is just finding sites that inspire you and just getting lost in links. Sometimes I'll go through CodePen stuff and like things that inspire me of this is really cool, and share that in our Slack channel for Understory as a team. Sometimes it's an amazing like an Instagram account. Like I just saw some artist who paints rocks that was really cool. Like so, UI and UX. There's UX sites that sometimes I don't even know. I'm trying to think what even they are. Sometimes I just click links. I don't even look at where they are. But the psychology side of how to approach UI designs. So I wish I give you an answer on that. My main thing would just be identify places online that inspire you, that give you good articles, that sign up for good newsletters. Um, I'm trying to think of one. I say that, and I don't even know what the name of it is. There's one that I'll find it. If you shoot me as Ezekiel, like if you follow me, I'll get you a better answer on that. I can give you some things, some email newsletters I sign up for. I really like those because I get busy, so I try to make sure on the weekends, like I said, try to get lost in links. But those finding really good ones of those are important because I do find a lot of inspiration from those, and so I can share that with you if you shoot me an email.
Okay, and I had one more question. I
Yes.
know sometimes there's a gap between the customer and the partner when it comes to design. And so, as a business owner for Understory, do you have any
Mhm.
contingencies put in place to ensure that your team gets something for the work that they already put out?
So are you saying the a discrepancy between what the client asked for versus what they should like in their audience, like who the user would be? Is that what you're saying? I wasn't quite following the question.
Oh, so like if you've designed something for your customer, but they're not too satisfied with the design, are there
Oh,
some contingent something put in place so that you ensure that your team is compensated for the work or the effort that you already put in?
gotcha. Okay. So yeah, so typically, in that estimate, we typically try to do at least, depending on the project. If it's a bigger project, we don't do half, but smaller projects we'll want half up front. or at least part of that money paid to be covered the time that we do into any kind of scoping. Like I talked about, we'll do a small scope to help with identifying, the structure or the strategy that's needed. But sometimes in that we'll cover our time because we will show design. I will say it's never happened to us as far as like, oh, we hate this, like walk away, like never. But there is feedback, but I don't think we've ever had where we show something and that they hated it. Usually there's feedback. To me, that's a sign of a communication breakdown. Like you should never put something in front of a client, and a lot of that I see as my job to make sure that we're doing something that's accurate for my understanding of seeing, if it's me doing the work or with someone on our team, at least we have internal reviews where we at least try to identify and get some of that feedback in place. So it never is it just a scrap all this, but there is varying levels of feedback that we get in that. So I find that if we're struggling with any kind of feedback, then that means we're not communicating. And so that means usually it just means to step back and see it. But never do we have it where it's like we don't get compensated for what we do. We make sure that that's established up front and there's an understanding there. But the revisions dance is always there. That's always part of like making sure that there's a vision that I call it the gauntlet a lot too. You have your vision of what you go into with your design and that goes into the client or goes into review process, especially if you're dealing with something where there's multiple reviews or a lot of times you might get to present to one client, but yet and that goes great, but then they got to take it and go share it with a board or go share it with other places. And that's where when you can't be there, like I always fight to say one note two is always present in person, always present on at least on a call, like not physically in person, at least where you can talk through things. Never, we do not email things. That's just you're asking for it on that. So it's a little harder when you can't be there. Sometimes you can't be. So you got to kind of prepare for that. That can be a frustrating or can be a challenge to understand how to handle that feedback where you can't be in that. So there is a level of management that really you can only learn by experience. You kind of just have to go through it and hopefully find a good mentor or be with someone who's been through it who can kind of help know when to panic or when there's a flag or where it's like, okay, this is normal feedback versus like, okay, this is this is not going down the right path. Like you kind of have to have some experience in that to know when to kind of hit the button to stop things. Yeah. Hopefully that answered your question at least.
And then I think I just have one last question.
Yes.
That did answer my question. Thank you. Um, what is a good turnaround time for if it's something simple? Like I'm using the one page site 'cause that's what you mentioned in your presentation. If it's something simple, what is a good turnaround time for that?
And again, it's tough because another thing that's rare is that clients come and they have an established brand guide. Again, it depends on, we work with agencies. We work directly with clients. We do work with agencies. Agencies typically are much better about that because they've already worked with their clients. So they will come to us and say, hey, here's our client's brand guide or here's whatever's with it. So having the most difficult thing with like a custom site is that first, well, of course I say this as a designer, but it is that first show, like coming up with something that fits based on your discussion of a design that has emotion to it, has all the boxes checked. 'Cause you have to be mindful of the goals, mindful of the functionality, mindful of so much that you have to put into it that to me, a successful design doesn't show all that. Like a client sees it and they immediately will love it because you're checking the boxes that either they knew or didn't know in that process. So I think part of that is it's hard to say how long that takes because having a good brand helps because that's you don't have to worry about picking colors or picking fonts and all that. But sometimes it's actually a challenge because sometimes someone's brand doesn't look good. So if their brand doesn't really, I always say if if you're handed a pile of garbage and someone says, "Hey, make something that looks good," it's kind of hard to do that. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's pretty hard to like say, make something good. So that varies too. Versus when someone comes in and you're handing something that's hot, that's like this looks awesome. Like it's pretty easy to put something together that looks good because you've already got. A lot of times I use comparisons of like ingredients and like recipes and cooking something it's similar to that. If you start out with really good ingredients, then the dish that you make is going to look great. But if you don't get good ingredients, then it could be a challenge. That could take more time, or sometimes you got to push boundaries and maybe have a hard conversation with a client to say we need to change it. And a lot of times we'll just do something that looks better and just try to let them know, hey, we had to do this, or we had to do that, and see how they react. And then sometimes it affects their brand, and we say it carries through and they update their brand from that. So I would say no less than a week. And again, that's depending on the team, what our workload is, what other projects we have going on. But as far as a design of like a look, no less than a week for like a single page site, and that would be my take on it. But again, clients come in and they got a rush job. That's all factored into the scope and the estimate. Then that's something that we can have in that.
Thank you. Well, I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you so much, Eric, for your time. Really appreciated this presentation. It was very insightful.
Great. Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. Have a good one.
You too.